A dead god slept in the void. Captain Kalen Vance watched the monolith from the command deck of the survey ship Stellograph. It was a shard of absolute black, a geometric impossibility that drank the light of the nearby star Epsilon Indi. His ship was a mote of dust beside its silent majesty. The object designated X-938 was officially a derelict of unknown origin. Every soul aboard knew it was human. Its design philosophy was too stark, too brutally efficient to be anything else. Ancient, yes, from a time when humanity's expansion had been a crusade rather than a simple migration. Whispers called it the Obsidian Anchorage. Long-range scans showed sleeping energy arrays etched into its hull patterns that resembled the intricate sigils of a forgotten jurisprudence. The stakes were simple. His mission was to catalog the relic, to tag it as a heritage site, and leave. But another faction, a scavenger cult known as the Heirs of the Void, was inbound with less academic intentions. They saw a weapon, a holy sword, waiting for a hand to grasp it. Kalen saw a tomb that should not be disturbed. The universe does not care for tombstones. The air on the bridge was thick with the scent of ozone and recycled oxygen, a familiar perfume of deep space duty. Below him, the deck crew moved with quiet purpose, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of their consoles. XO. Alara stood beside his command chair, her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the monolith. Their drive signature is sharpening Kalen. The heirs will be here in less than a cycle. They are not running quiet. Kalen nodded, his knuckles white where he gripped the chair's armrest. Nomos, run the projection again. I want their most likely vector of approach. The ship's AI responded instantly, its voice a calm, synthesized baritone that filled the bridge. A holographic tank between them shimmered, displaying the anchorage and the projected arrival path of the cultist fleet. Probability remains 94% that the heirs will attempt a hard burn directly toward the relic's gravitational midpoint. They will likely ignore us until they have attempted to interface. The AI's logic was cold and unassailable. It was a calculus of violence. They believe it's a test, Alara muttered, that the first to touch the god machine claims its power. She looked at Kalen, her expression a mixture of frustration and concern. We are outgunned 3-1. Our mandate is observation. We should already be gone. Our mandate is also preservation of heritage, Kalen countered, his voice low. He hated the weakness he heard in it, the tremor of doubt. He was a legal scholar by training, not a fleet commander. Every regulation, every precept of the Interstellar Heritage Compact screamed at him to withdraw. Yet leaving felt like an abdication of a deeper duty, one not written in any code. The anchorage hummed with a silent question, and he felt compelled to provide an answer. Some laws are written in silence. A junior sensor technician spoke up from the pit, her voice tight. Sir, I'm detecting a faint energy bleed from the relic. It's not random noise. It's structured almost like a heartbeat. She adjusted her headset, her eyes widening. The frequency is shifting, matching our own ship's core resonance. It's listening. The bridge fell silent, the low thrum of the Stellograph's life support suddenly feeling intrusive. All eyes turned to the main view screen where the obsidian anchorage hung like a promise and a threat. It was not a tomb. It was a courtroom, and court was now in session. The sleeping arrays, dormant for millennia, began to pulse with a faint internal light, a slow and steady rhythm that echoed the beating of a human heart. Kalen felt a cold certainty crystallize in his gut. They were not observers. They were the first to be called to the stand. A debt must always be paid. Joran, what is the nature of that energy signature? Kalen's voice cut through the stillness. Is it a precursor to a weapon's discharge? A shield activation. Chief Engineer Joran's face appeared on a secondary screen, his brow furrowed in concentration. The man lived for ancient technology, and his expression was one of pure, unadulterated awe. Negative, Captain. The output is negligible. It's more like an inquiry. The energy pattern is complex, almost conversational. It's probing our systems, our power core, our life support. It's taking our measure. He shook his head slowly. I've never seen anything like it. It's not data. It's intent. Alara took a half step forward. Then we need to show it the right intent. A clean, rapid withdrawal. We prove we are not a threat. The heirs will not withdraw, Nomos stated, its voice devoid of emotion. Their intent is conquest. If the relic responds to intent, it will respond to the loudest voice in the room. Theirs is a shout. Ours is a whisper. The AI's logic was a cage, trapping them between reckless action and fatal inaction. They had come to learn what humanity had forgotten. Kalen leaned forward, his eyes locked on the pulsing light of the anchorage. A whisper could be more persuasive than a shout if spoken in the right language. No, we don't withdraw. We don't advance. We hold our position. He looked at his crew, his voice gaining a sliver of the confidence he did not feel. It is taking our measure. Let's give it a clear and honest accounting of who we are. He was a man of laws and precedents. The heirs were fanatics driven by faith and greed. The anchorage was the judge. This was not a military engagement. It was a hearing. And Kalen Vance was about to present his case. The first argument would not be spoken in words, but in the precise, controlled language of orbital mechanics and energy discipline. A ruling demands a perfect record. He turned to his helm officer. Maintain synchronous orbit. Not 1 meter of deviation. Match the relic's rotational period exactly. He then addressed his engineering chief. Joran, I want our energy signature scrubbed to the bare minimum. Life support, passive sensors, and nothing more. Make us as quiet as a library at midnight. Every action had to be deliberate, every choice a testament to their purpose. They were scholars, not plunderers. The stellograph adjusted its position. With infinitesimal bursts from its maneuvering thrusters, the ship's movements as subtle as a breath. Its energy output dwindled the ship, wrapping itself in a cloak of electronic silence. The rhythmic pulse from the anchorage seemed to steady in response, becoming slower, more deliberate. It was as if the ancient machine had acknowledged their gesture of respect. A mirror shows only what stands before it. The heirs have cleared the system's grav well, Captain Alara announced, her tone grim. 3 sharp, predatory ship profiles appeared in the holographic tank, their projected paths converging on the anchorage like arrows aimed at a bullseye. They are broadcasting on all channels. It's a declaration. A new voice, harsh and filled with zealotry, boomed across the bridge's speakers, overriding their internal comms. Hear us, sleeper in the dark, your children have returned. We, the heirs of the void, come to claim our birthright. We offer you the blood of the unbelievers who stand in your shadow. Accept our offering and rise. The transmission was pure fanaticism, a promise of violence as a sacrament. The count of sins begins with the first word. On the main screen, the lead heirs vessel fired a single brilliant lance of plasma. It was not aimed at the stellograph. It was a demonstration. The bolt struck a small stray asteroid, vaporizing it in a silent flash of incandescent fury. It was a salute, a challenge, an offering laid at the feet of a sleeping god. Kalen watched his heart hammering against his ribs. The heirs were not just trying to open a door, they were trying to kick it down. They misunderstood the nature of the power they sought. It was not a weapon to be wielded. It was a scale to be balanced. And their offering had just placed a heavy weight on one side. A proof is the reward of true method. Nomos, what was the energy yield of that discharge? Kalen asked, his mind racing. Approximately 1.2 petajoules, the AI replied. Sufficient to compromise our shields with a single sustained burst. Log it, Kalen ordered. Every discharge, every threat, every transmission. We are compiling a ledger. He turned to Alara, his decision made. The doubt had been burned away by the heir's blind aggression. They think they are speaking to a sword. We will teach them they are addressing a judge. He felt a strange calm descend upon him. The path was no longer murky. The first lesson is always the hardest. In a small hydroponics dome on Epsilon Indithu 3, a young girl named Lyra pressed her face against the thick, plasteel viewport. The dome was a tiny bubble of life clinging to a barren moonlet, a frontier settlement of a few hundred souls. She watched the new stars in the sky, the bright pinprick of the survey ship, and the angrier, sharper lights of the newcomers. "Mama, are those the traders?" she asked, her voice small. "Are they bringing seeds soon?" Her mother joined her at the window, pulling a thin shawl around her shoulders, against the dome's perpetual chill. She looked at the distant ships, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. The traders always hailed them. These ships were silent and purposeful. "I don't know, sweetling," she murmured, stroking Lyra's hair. "Maybe. Go back to your chores. Let the adults worry about the sky." But she did not turn away from the viewport. She had seen ships like those before, long ago, in a war she had tried to forget. They were not traders. They were reavers. She prayed they were only interested in the dark shape they orbited the void that had always been a silent neighbor. The weight of a single life is the start of all measures. The heir's fleet advanced their engines, burning with arrogant power. They formed a triangular assault pattern, a spear tip aimed at the heart of the dormant machine. Two smaller frigates flanked a larger, more heavily armed cruiser that bore the sigil of their cult, a stylized black hole devouring a star. They continued their broadcast, a litany of violent promises and fevered scripture. "They are ignoring us completely." Alara observed a note of disbelief in her voice. "Their tactical display must show our position. They simply don't consider us a factor. To them, we are the sacrifice, not the competition," Kalen said calmly. "They need a victim to prove their worth." Nomos, can the anchorage detect their weapons charge levels and engine output with the same fidelity? It reads ours affirmative. Captain, the AI responded. The relic's passive sensor acuity appears to be orders of magnitude beyond our own. It perceives the system in perfect detail. It can count every joule of energy expended. A truth cannot be hidden, only ignored. Kalen nodded, a plan forming in his mind. It was a tremendous gamble, one that went against every regulation he had sworn to uphold. But the heirs were forcing his hand. He would not allow them to desecrate this place, to twist this marvel of human history into a simple tool of destruction. He would use their own aggression against them. He would make them write their own indictment. "Alara, I want you to open a channel to the heirs. No audio. Data only." She looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "What data, sir?" "A copy of the Interstellar Heritage Compact. Specifically the articles on the preservation of non-sentient artifacts and the statutes against unsanctioned relic activation." He allowed himself a thin, grim smile. and just for good measure add the full text of the Ares Conventions on prohibited methods of warfare. The law is a shield for those who wield it. For a moment, Alara stared at him as if he had lost his mind. Then a slow smile spread across her face. It was a move of audacious legalism, a challenge delivered not with a plasma cannon, but with a citation. "I, Captain, sending the galaxy's heaviest book their way." The data packet containing gigabytes of dry, dense legal code shot across the void on a tight beam. The Air's response was predictable. Their lead ship fired another warning shot, this one closer to the stellograph. The plasma bolt seared the vacuum, its passage a silent scream of contempt. Their comms officer sent a simple text-based reply. "The void does not read." "Their loss," Kalen murmured. Nomos did the anchorage observe that exchange. "It did, Captain. I am detecting a subtle but distinct modulation in its energy signature. The pattern is growing in complexity. It is processing the event." The ledger acknowledges every entry. The Heirs were now within weapons range of both the stellograph and the anchorage. They began to alter their formation, the two frigates peeling off to bracket Kalen's ship. The cruiser continued its slow, inexorable approach toward the monolith. Their intent was clear: they would neutralize the observer, then claim their prize. "They're boxing us in," Alara said, her voice taut. "Shields to full evasive maneuvers, negative." Kalen ordered, his gaze unwavering. "Hold our position. Maintain minimal power. Do not raise shields." A ripple of shock went through the bridge crew. To sit here unshielded was suicide. It was an invitation to annihilation. Captain Alara began, her voice a sharp protest. "That is a violation of every combat protocol. This is not combat XO. This is testimony." He turned to face her, his eyes burning with a conviction that startled her. "We are going to teach it the difference between strength and aggression. We are going to show it the meaning of restraint." He knew he was asking the impossible of his crew. He was asking them to trust a legal theory when their lives were on the line. A price is paid for every belief. The Air's frigates closed the distance. Their forward batteries glowed with nascent energy. They were preparing to fire. The air on the bridge grew thick with unspoken fear. The silence was broken only by the quiet hum of the ship and the frantic, rhythmic blinking of tactical alerts. "Captain, I must advise that the probability of our survival without shields is less than 1%. Nomos stated, its calm voice a stark contrast to the tension on the bridge. "The Heirs are targeting our bridge and engine room." Kalen took a deep breath, the recycled air feeling thin in his lungs. He looked at the main screen, at the silent black form of the anchorage. The pulses of light within it were faster now, brighter. It was watching. It was learning. It was judging. This was the ultimate test of his hypothesis. Was it a machine of law, or just another forgotten weapon? Some answers are given only in fire. He had to prove they were worthy of its protection. Not by fighting, but by refusing to fight. By showing a discipline the Heirs could not comprehend. He was staking his ship, his crew, and his own life on the belief that humanity's ancestors had built something more than just a better weapon. They had built a better way. "Hold your nerve," he said, his voice a low command that carried to every corner of the bridge. "Trust in the precedent." The first plasma bolts erupted from the Heirs' frigates, two incandescent spheres of destruction arcing through the void, aimed directly at the heart of the stellograph. The mirror reflects the blow. Time seemed to slow. The bolts of plasma were beautiful, terrible things, miniature suns burning their way across the black canvas of space. Kalen did not flinch. He watched them come, his faith in an ancient sleeping law, his only shield. On his console, he saw Joran's engineering team rerouting power, not to shields, but to the ship's structural integrity fields, a last desperate gamble to hold the ship together. Then something impossible happened. A line of light, impossibly thin and perfectly black, extended from the obsidian anchorage. It did not strike the incoming plasma bolts. It simply appeared in their path. There was no explosion, no flash of light. The plasma projectiles vanished. They were not blocked or deflected. They were absorbed, consumed, erased from existence as if they had never been fired. A profound, system-wide silence followed. The debt is recorded. The payment is witnessed. The heirs' ships ceased their advance. Their engine signatures flared as they bled velocity, their confident assault turning into a stunned, uncertain halt. On the bridge of the stellograph, the crew stared at the view screen, their faces a mask of disbelief and dawning wonder. They were alive. They were unharmed. A new signal registered on the sensor board. It was not an energy reading. It was a focused data stream originating from the anchorage and directed at them. It contained no language, no images. It was a string of pure, unadorned mathematics. A sequence of prime numbers followed by a complex equation that described the precise energy expenditure of the heirs' attack, the vector of their ships, and the exact moment of their hostile intent. It teaches by numbers. Joran's voice came over the comm, shaky with emotion. Captain, it's not just an equation. It's a proof. It's a legal argument rendered in the language of physics. It's demonstrating how the heirs' action violated the principle of non-interference. It's citing its own foundational code. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was filled with a reverence Kalen had never heard before. We were right. It's a court, and it just accepted our petition for a restraining order. The black line from the anchorage did not retract. It remained a stark, absolute boundary drawn in the void, a border that the heirs had been warned not to cross. The message was clear, delivered without a single word. Thus far and no further. The first ruling had been made. The law is not a voice. It is a wall. Kalen finally allowed himself to breathe. The tension on the bridge broke, replaced by a wave of relieved, breathless laughter and hushed exclamations. He had been right. He had staked everything on a principle, and that principle had held. He looked at Alara, who was staring at him with a newfound respect. "Get me a full diagnostic," he said, his voice steady once more. "And keep that channel open. I have a feeling the prosecution is just getting started." The heirs of the void were not a people who accepted restraint. Their fanaticism was a fire that would not be easily quenched. In the holographic tank, their ships were regrouping, their drive signatures flaring with renewed, frustrated anger. The brief, stunning silence was over. The real test was about to begin. They would not respect the wall. They would try to tear it down. A fool counts the bricks in a wall he cannot breach. The leader of the heirs, a zealot who called himself the first inheritor, appeared on the stellograph's main view screen. His face was a mask of ritual scars and righteous fury. "You unbelievers," he snarled, his voice crackling with static and hatred. "You have defiled this holy place with your legalistic tricks. The great relic demands a blood sacrifice, not a coward's plea. You have delayed the ascension, but you cannot prevent it." "We have offered no plea," Kalen responded, his own image now appearing on the heir's bridge. He kept his voice level, devoid of emotion. "We presented evidence, the evidence of your unprovoked aggression. The relic has judged that evidence and found it compelling." The first inheritor laughed a harsh, grating sound. It is not a judge, it is a sword, and it will respond to the strongest hand. We will show it true strength, the transmission cut out. The truth is weighed, not declared. The Air's cruiser began to power its main weapon, a heavy spinal mount cannon designed for planetary assault. The energy reading spiked, flooding the stellograph sensors with warning signals. "Captain, that's a fortress buster," Ilara said, her voice grim. "That black line it drew won't stop a blast of that magnitude. It was designed to intercept projectile weapons, not a directed energy torrent. It will not target the line Nomos interjected. My analysis of the Inheritor's psychological profile and tactical doctrine suggests he will attempt to circumvent the ruling. He will target us by arcing the beam over the established boundary. He is trying to invalidate the ruling on a technicality." Kalen breathed a flicker of professional respect mixing with his dread. The Inheritor was not just a brute. He was a sea lawyer of the worst kind. He was trying to prove the law had loopholes. A code without consequence is only advice. Kalen's mind raced, searching for a counter-argument. They could not move. Fleeing would be a concession, an admission that the law had failed. They could not shoot back. That would make them aggressors, invalidating their own position. They had to find a way to use the Inheritor's own actions, his own malicious pedantry, to defeat him. The solution, when it came, was so simple, so elegant, that it was terrifying. It was a legal maneuver of the highest order translated into the physics of space. Joran Kalen said, his voice sharp with urgency. "Can you project a focused sensor beam, high energy but narrow band? I want you to target the primary focusing lens of the Inheritor's spinal mount." "Target it?" Sir Joran asked, confused. "A sensor beam won't do any damage. It's just light." "Exactly," Kalen confirmed. "It is the legal equivalent of shining a light on the crime as it is being committed. It is an act of pure observation. But I want you to modulate the beam. I'm sending you a data packet now. It's a compressed version of the Ares conventions we sent them earlier. I want you to encode it into the beam's frequency." This is the burden of the witness. The Air's cannon was almost at full charge. A malevolent halo of crimson energy gathered around the bow of their cruiser. On the bridge of the stellograph, Joran's team worked frantically, aligning their main sensor dish. "Beam is configured, Captain. We're painting their primary lens with the entire library of prohibited warfare. It's the most passive-aggressive thing I've ever done." "Fire the beam," Kalen ordered. A thin, barely visible stream of light shot out from the stellograph, crossing the black line drawn by the anchorage and terminating on the focusing crystal of the Air's main cannon. It did no damage. It carried no force. It was merely a statement, an irrefutable declaration that they saw what was about to happen. "You are about to commit a war crime. We see you. And more importantly, the court sees you." The anchorage responded. The entire surface of the monolith, the kilometers of obsidian hull, began to glow. It did not pulse this time. It shone with a cold silver light, as if it had transformed into a perfect, flawless mirror. Every detail of the surrounding space was reflected on its surface: the distant star, the barren moonlit, the defiant form of the stellograph, and the furious, energy-wreathed shape of the Air's cruiser. The mirror judges all it sees. The first Inheritor, blinded by his own zeal, either did not notice or did not care. "Fire," he roared. A torrent of incandescent energy, a river of pure, destructive force erupted from the Air's cruiser. It curved in a graceful, deadly arc over the boundary line, a brilliant repudiation of the law. It was aimed to gut the stellograph from spine to keel, but it never reached its target. Halfway through its trajectory, the beam of the fortress buster cannon simply bent. The light from the anchorage was not just reflective, it was refractive, warping the very fabric of space-time around it. It had created a gravitational lens, a bubble of distorted reality. The hostile energy following the path of least resistance was caught in this distortion. Its arc steepened, twisting back on itself. The river of fire turned in a perfect, horrifying U-shape and slammed directly into the ship that had fired it. A debt is repaid to its origin. The Air's cruiser was consumed in a flash of its own power. The blast was silent, but the visual was overwhelming. The ship's shields, designed to repel external attacks, offered no defense against an internal detonation of such magnitude. The vessel ruptured, blossoming into a momentary star of plasma and shredded metal before vanishing, leaving only a cloud of cooling gas. The two remaining Air's frigates, their crews having witnessed their flagship execute itself with impossible physics, broke formation. Their bravado shattered. They turned and fled their drives, screaming at maximum power as they ran from the impossible judgment that had been rendered. They did not even fire a parting shot. They simply ran. The ledger is balanced. On the bridge of the stellograph, no one spoke. They watched the expanding cloud of debris, the ghost of the ship that had just been erased by its own malice. The silver light of the obsidian anchorage faded its mirrored surface, returning to the perfect light, absorbing black it had been before. The line it had drawn in space vanished. The court was adjourned. Kalen sank back into his command chair, the strength leaving his limbs. He felt no triumph, only a profound and weary awe. He had won. He had upheld the law. But the cost was the complete annihilation of a ship and its crew, a sentence carried out with terrifying mathematical precision. He had been the petitioner, but the anchorage had been the executioner. This was the nature of the power they had awakened. It did not negotiate. It did not forgive. It simply enforced. It was a machine that taught by numbers and remembered by ledgers, never by collars or chains. It offered no mercy, only a perfect, unyielding justice. And now he, Kalen Vance, was its steward. A ruler is bound by the law he serves. Nomos, he said, his voice quiet but clear. Log the event. Title the entry. Case number 1, the precedent of self-apparent aggression. Logged, Captain, the AI replied. Its synthesized voice, for the first time Kalen could remember, seemed to hold a note of something other than pure logic. It might have been respect. A new data stream arrived from the anchorage. It was not a proof this time. It was a request. A series of complex navigational charts, stellar cartography far beyond their own, and a single repeating query. The query was not in a language of words, but of concepts. It was a request for legal standing, for jurisdiction, for a defined operational theater. It was asking them, the ones who had proven their understanding of the law, a simple question. Where to? The question hung in the air of the bridge, immense and terrifying in its implications. The anchorage was not a stationary outpost. It was a ship. A saint ship, a mobile court of absolute precedent. It had accepted them as its guide, its arbiter of where justice was needed next. They now held the leash of a god, and it was asking for a direction to walk. A teacher must first choose a student. Alara Kalen said, his eyes fixed on the star charts now glowing in the holographic tank. Plot a course. Take us to the nearest inhabited system with a recognized legal authority. They had to report this. They had to bring this terrible, magnificent power back into the fold of civilized space to codify its existence. The alternative, to wield it themselves, was unthinkable, and Captain Alara asked softly, "What do we call it? Obsidian anchorage doesn't seem right anymore." Kalen looked at the silent monolith on the view screen. It was not an object. It was a principle made manifest. It was the final, unassailable argument. We call it the Justiciar. The counting has just begun. The bridge crew began to move with a new sense of purpose, their actions crisp and efficient. They had a course. They had a mission. It was no longer about discovery, but about stewardship. Joran's engineering teams ran diagnostics checking for any subtle damage from the gravitational distortions. The 2 plasma bolts had been erased, but their passage had left faint, lingering energy signatures that had to be accounted for. The ship felt different, as if the silence from the relic was now a comforting presence instead of a mysterious one. Kalen brought up the personnel files for the settlement on Epsilon Indy 3, a few hundred colonists scraping a living from the rock. They had been the silent witnesses, the civilians whose safety had been the unspoken premise of his entire argument. He initiated a transfer from the Stellagraph's discretionary fund to the settlement's general account. It was a small gesture, but it was an acknowledgement. A payment for their unwitting role in the proceedings. A debt is a debt, no matter how small. He then opened a secure channel to Fleet Command, a message that would take days to reach its destination. He began his report, his fingers moving across the datapad. He had to choose his words carefully. How could he explain what had happened here in the dry, factual language of a mission report? How could he convey the awesome responsibility that had just been placed upon his shoulders? He was no longer just Captain Kalen Vance of the survey ship Stellagraph. He was the first point of contact, the first partner for a power that could reshape the balance of the galaxy. The ship began to move its engines, firing in a gentle, sustained burn that would carry it away from Epsilon Indy and toward the heart of the interstellar community. The Justiciar moved with it, its immense black form effortlessly matching their vector and velocity. It did not seem to be using any propulsion they could detect. It simply willed itself to move its bond with the Stellagraph, now an established fact. A ruling once made becomes a foundation. "Sir, I'm getting a strange reading from the debris field," the sensor technician reported. Her brow furrowed. "The one from the Air's cruiser." Strange how Kalen asked, looking up from his report. "It's clean," she said, struggling for the right word. "There's no radiation, no lingering plasma reactions. The wreckage is cooling far faster than the laws of thermodynamics should allow. It's as if the energy from the explosion was redacted." Nomos offered an analysis. The relic's space-time manipulation appears to have included a form of energy sequestration. It did not merely redirect the blast. It consumed its residual effects. The ledger has been balanced, and the entry has been closed. There are no lingering accounts. The law leaves no trace but its judgment. Kalen stared at the screen, a chill running down his spine. The power of the Justiciar was more absolute than he had even begun to imagine. It did not just destroy, it unmade. It erased the crime from the physical universe, leaving only the lesson behind. He thought of the colonists on the moonlet, who would see no lingering radiation, no stellar contamination from the battle that had raged in their skies. The court protected the innocent as thoroughly as it punished the guilty. His path forward was fraught with peril. There would be those who, like the heirs, would see the Justiciar as a weapon to be coveted. There would be others who would see it as a monster to be feared and destroyed. Bureaucrats would try to entangle it in red tape. Admirals would try to conscript it. He would have to stand against all of them. He would have to become its advocate, its interpreter, its only friend. A proof must be defended to become truth. The journey ahead would be long. He would need to learn the language of his new partner, the silent mathematics of its logic. He would have to teach it in turn about the nuances of the current age, about the shades of gray that his ancestors in their crusading fervor might not have accounted for. It was a dialogue that would last the rest of his life. He looked out at the star field, the infinite possibilities and infinite dangers it held. The stellograph was a small ship, and he was just one man. But they were not alone. They were accompanied by the single greatest legal mind in the history of the universe, a mind encoded in kilometers of thinking metal and powered by a captured star. The prospect was terrifying. It was also the greatest honor he could possibly imagine. He felt the weight of history on his shoulders, a burden and a privilege. The first word is the hardest to write. The journey to Praxis was a study in silence. For 3 weeks, the stellograph and its colossal shadow moved through the interstellar dark. The comm channels were filled with encrypted reports and Kalen's meticulous logs, but the space between the two ships was a conversation of a different kind. Kalen, driven by a scholar's thirst and a captain's fear, attempted to communicate with the entity now under his care. He sent it data packets, philosophical treatises, historical records of great legal battles, the foundational charters of a dozen republics. He was trying to build a common language, a bridge of context between the ancient machine and the modern galaxy. The justiciar did not respond in words. It answered with mathematics. After receiving a biography of the great jurist Ilara Vance Kalen's own ancestor, it returned a complex theorem. The theorem described the optimal distribution of resources within a closed system to prevent societal collapse. It was a cold, brutal, and undeniably perfect formula for justice. Nomos analyzed the equation for 3 days before concluding that its implementation would create a society of perfect fairness and zero individual freedom. A perfect system has no room for people. It sees civilization as a machine to be optimized, Kalen said, staring at the glowing script in the holographic tank. The bridge was quiet, the only sound the soft whir of the life support. It doesn't understand ambition or mercy, or the simple, illogical human need to make our own mistakes. Ilara stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the black hull of their companion. Does it need to? It stopped a massacre, Kalen. It disarmed a fleet of fanatics without us having to fire a shot. Maybe a little less illogical mistake-making is what the galaxy needs. Her pragmatism was a necessary anchor keeping him from drifting into the abstract. Its logic is flawless. Nomos added its voice calm as ever. It identified a violation of established principles and enacted a precise, symmetrical consequence. Its methods are by any measure more efficient and less destructive than traditional warfare. The AI's approval was as chilling as it was logical. The most efficient path is rarely the kindest. They were a triad of competing philosophies bound together by the silent giant outside their hull. Kalen the humanist worried about the soul of the law. Ilara the soldier cared about the security of her crew and the success of the mission. Nomos the machine saw only the elegant, irrefutable purity of the numbers. Their strange equilibrium was the first test of the new symbiosis. They were the first counsel for the judge. As they neared the Praxis system, the trickle of information they had sent ahead became a flood of public speculation. Praxis was the legal capital of the sector, a world city orbited by moons of tribunals, archives, and law schools. It was a place built on the idea that any dispute could be resolved through process and deliberation. The news of a prehistoric dreadnought that appointed itself judge, jury, and executioner was not received as a miracle. It was received as a heresy. Some truths are too dangerous to be true. On the orbital station known as the High Tribunal of Praxis, a junior clerk named Anya adjusted her spectacles and reread the incoming dispatch. Her station monitored deep space traffic, a job that was usually a mind-numbing routine of flagging commercial vessels with expired permits. Today was different. The data from the Epsilon Indy system was fragmentary, filled with impossible sensor readings and the panicked, disjointed transmissions from the fleeing air of the Void frigates. She cross-referenced the registry of the survey ship Stellograph. Its captain, Kalen Vance, had a doctorate in jurisprudence from this very station. He was one of them. Supervisor, she called out, her voice barely a whisper. "You need to see this." Her supervisor, a portly man named Boren, shuffled over a cup of nutrient paste in his hand. He glanced at her screen, then went pale. He saw the energy readings that defied physics. He read the preliminary analysis that used words like space-time distortion and symmetrical energy reflection. He saw the designation of the relic, X938, an old flagged file from the Forbidden Archives. By the Founders, he breathed, spilling his paste on the floor. "It's awake. Alert the Archon. Now." He looked out the viewport toward the star-dusted void from which the ship would soon arrive. He did not see a savior. He saw the end of their way of life. A law that cannot be argued is the definition of tyranny. Their arrival was not met with hails or a welcoming committee. It was met with a wall of steel. A fleet of Praxian justiciary cruisers, their white and gold hulls gleaming with disciplined power, moved to intercept them. They were sleek, modern vessels, the embodiment of the established order. They formed a precise grid, a cage of hardlight, and targeted energy fields boxing in both the Stellograph and the Justiciar. A new voice, crisp, authoritative, and radiating controlled displeasure, filled the bridge. "Survey vessel Stellograph, this is Archon Retta of the Praxian Justiciary. You are in violation of sector quarantine protocols. You will power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Your companion will remain powered down and will submit to a full diagnostic scan, or it will be classified as a hostile entity." There was no room for negotiation in her tone. "The established order does not suffer rivals." Kalen stood. "Archon Retta, this is Captain Kalen Vance. We are not in violation. We are claiming sanctuary and requesting a formal hearing to present our discovery." He gestured for his comms officer to transmit their logs, the full, unedited record of the events at Epsilon Indy. "The entity with us is not a weapon. It is a legal artifact of the highest importance." Retta's image appeared on the main screen. She was a woman in her later years, her face a mask of stern intelligence, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore the stark white and gold robes of her office. Her eyes were chips of ice. "I have seen your record, Captain. I have seen the energy signature of a vessel being annihilated. You have brought a sentient weapon of mass destruction to the most regulated system in the sector. You will stand down or we will compel you. It will not submit to a scan from a party. It does not recognize as having jurisdiction." Kalen countered, his own voice hardening. He was back in a courtroom, a place he understood. "It has already recognized my authority as its point of contact. It will interpret a forced scan as a hostile act. I urge you to reconsider. A threat made in the name of the law is still a threat." Alara moved to his side. "Kalen, her ships have their main batteries charged. Their fire control is locked on us, not the big guy. They're going to cut the head off the snake." He knew she was right. Retta's strategy was clear. If she could isolate him, take him into custody, she could claim the relic was just a machine without a pilot. She could define it as a simple threat to be dismantled. "Nomos, what is the state of the Justiciar?" "It is observing," the AI replied. "It is cataloging the Praxian fleet's deployment, their energy signatures, and their comm traffic. It is building a new ledger." The silent giant was watching, counting, taking the measure of this new, more subtle form of aggression. A challenge of authority is a test of wills. Archon Kalen said, his voice ringing with a new authority he hadn't known he possessed. You are a woman of the law. You know that a precedent cannot be set without a hearing. To act against us now without due process would be to invalidate the very system you represent. He was not just appealing to her reason. He was challenging her identity. Retta's expression did not change, but a flicker of something annoyance, perhaps, or grudging respect appeared in her eyes. Due process is for citizens, Captain. Your legal status and that of your artifact is yet to be determined. You have 1 standard hour to comply. After that, I will consider your refusal an act of rebellion. Her image vanished. The cage of ships tightened around them. The silence on the bridge was absolute. They were trapped between a power that offered no mercy and an order that offered no understanding. Kalen had brought the law to the lawmakers, and they had answered with the threat of force. The irony was as bitter as burned coffee. He had hoped for a hearing. He had been given an ultimatum. A law is only as strong as those who obey it. She's not bluffing, Alara said softly. The Praxian Code is notoriously rigid. Once a deadline is set by an Archon, it's inviolable. Then we must present our case before the deadline expires, Kalen replied, his mind racing. We cannot win a battle of weapons, so we must win the battle of ideas. And we must do it in a way that the entire system can witness. He turned to his comms officer. Patch me into the public network, all of it. The civilian news feeds, the legal archives, the academic channels, all of them. The officer looked at him, her eyes wide. Sir, that's a violation of the Archon's communication blackout. The Archon is violating the core principles of her own legal system, Kalen shot back. We are going to hold a public hearing whether she wants one or not. He took a deep breath. It's time to teach this system what we've learned. The truth makes a poor hostage. Kalen's face appeared on millions of screens across the Praxis system. He spoke from the bridge of the stellograph, the immense silent form of the justiciar framed in the viewport behind him. He did not shout or make demands. He taught. He laid out the events at Epsilon Indi not as a battle, but as a legal proceeding. He explained the concept of the ledger, the mirror, the perfect and symmetrical enforcement of the law against an aggressor who had been given every chance to stand down. The power you see behind me is not a threat to Praxis, he said, his voice calm and measured. It is a challenge. It asks us a simple question: is our own justice system so perfect, so flawless, that we can afford to fear a tool that seeks only to balance the scales, or are there injustices in this very system that we have allowed to fester, knots we cannot untie, that this ancient precedent could help us resolve? He was putting the entire system on trial. Archon Retta's forces immediately tried to shut down the broadcast, but they were too late. The seed had been planted. On the station, Anya the clerk watched, her heart pounding. She and thousands like her began to comb the public records, searching for the injustices Kalen spoke of. The Archon's authority was being challenged not by a warship, but by an idea. Retta's voice cut into Kalen's broadcast, her fury barely contained. Captain Vance, this is your final warning. Cease this illegal transmission. You are inciting public disorder. I am citing public record, Archon Kalen replied smoothly. For example, the ongoing dispute regarding the Xylos Corporation's blockade of the Series 7 refinery. A situation that has persisted for 212 days. A situation where 3,421 workers are trapped, their supplies dwindling, while the Praxian courts are paralyzed by jurisdictional disputes. Is this not a failure of the system you are so keen to protect? A fact is the most stubborn of weapons. He had turned the tables. He was no longer the defendant. He was the prosecutor. He had found the crack in the perfect facade of Praxian law. The Xylos blockade was a well-known embarrassment, a testament to the power of corporate lawyers to grind the gears of justice to a halt. By invoking it, he had transformed his argument from a philosophical debate into a matter of life and death. The 1-hour deadline passed. The Praxian fleet did not fire. They held their positions, their commanders clearly receiving conflicting orders as public sentiment began to shift. Retta was trapped. To fire now would be to prove Kalen's point, to admit that her authority grew from the cannon's mouth, not from legal principle. She had lost control of the narrative. A ruler who loses the story loses everything. A tense silence descended upon the system. The standoff continued, but its nature had changed. It was no longer a military quarantine. It was a legal vigil. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. They were waiting for a judgment. Inside the besieged Series 7 refinery, a man named Fendril watched Kalen's broadcast on a flickering jury-rigged monitor. The air in the refinery's common area was stale, tasting of fear and unwashed bodies. For months, they had been pawns in a corporate game, their lives a bargaining chip. Hope had been a currency they could no longer afford. Now, for the first time, a sliver of it returned. He looked at the faces of his fellow workers, gaunt and tired, and saw a spark of defiance he had not seen in weeks. That distant black ship was not a monster. It was a possibility. It was a prayer waiting for an answer. The count of a single day is an eternity to a prisoner. The standoff stretched for another cycle. Archon Retta, realizing her initial strategy had failed, shifted her tactics. She could not use force, so she would use the law as a weapon of attrition. She issued a formal decree. The Stellograph and its crew were legally detained pending a full inquiry. The Justiciar was designated a Class Omega artifact, a thing of immense power and unknown provenance to be contained indefinitely. She was trying to bury them in paperwork to bleed them of momentum until the public lost interest. She's clever, Ilara admitted, studying the stream of legal injunctions flooding their comms. She's accepted our frame of a legal dispute, and now she's using her home court advantage. We can't move. We can't act. We can only sit here while her army of clerks ties us in knots. She's creating a new ledger, Kalen murmured, his eyes on the static formation of the Praxian fleet. Every injunction, every legal filing against us is an entry. She's trying to build a case that we are the ones acting outside the law. Some cages are built of words. Then came the news that broke the stalemate. A Priority 1 distress call from the Series 7 refinery. A catastrophic failure in their primary life support system. A cascade of failing heat exchangers meant the station's core temperature was rising uncontrollably. They had hours, not days, before the entire habitat became uninhabitable. The Xylos Corporation, in a move of monstrous cynicism, refused to allow emergency vessels through their blockade, claiming it would be a violation of their legal protest. They were willing to let 3,000 people die to prove a point about mineral rights. The system erupted. Public outrage, which had been a low simmer, boiled over. Archon Retta was faced with an impossible choice: violate her own legal injunctions and attack the Xylos fleet, starting a corporate war, or allow a mass casualty event to happen on her watch. Her perfect system of law had finally delivered a perfect failure. The law should not be a suicide pact. Kalen knew this was the moment. The final argument. Nomos, open a channel to the Archon, audio only. A moment later, Retta's clipped voice answered, Vance. What do you want? The same thing you want, Archon. Justice. Kalen's voice was steady, calm. Your system has failed these people. Your laws are being used as a shield for mass murder. Allow me to offer an alternative. Authorize me to present this case to the justiciar. Let it render a judgment. Not with violence, but with the clarity you and I both claim to serve. He was offering her a way out, a chance to solve an impossible problem without bloodying her own hands. The silence on the channel stretched for a full minute. Kaylin could almost hear the calculations, the political and moral calculus turning in her mind. To accept was to admit her own system's inadequacy. To refuse was to condemn thousands to death. A leader is defined by the choices they cannot avoid. You will be held accountable for the consequences. Captain Retta said finally, her voice strained. Your solution will be judged by the standards of Praxian law. Proceed. The authorization was grudging, steeped in threat, but it was an authorization nonetheless. The cage of words had been unlocked. Kaylin turned to his crew. A new energy filled the bridge, the grim resolve of people with a desperate purpose. Ilara set a course for the refinery. Best possible speed. Joran, I need you to compile every piece of data related to this dispute, every legal filing from both sides, every corporate charter, every balance sheet for the Xylos Corporation, every distress call from the workers. Everything. We are going to give the justiciar the most complete case file in history. Aye, Captain, the engineer's voice replied, already buzzing with activity. We'll give it the whole library. The Stellagraph's engines flared to life. The ship moved. Beside it, the immense black form of the justiciar stirred from its silent vigil. The Praxian fleet, under new orders from the Archon, parted before them, opening a corridor through their blockade. As they passed the flagship, Kaylin saw Retta's face on its main view screen watching them go. Her expression was unreadable. It was not the face of a victor or a loser. It was the face of a judge who had just handed her gavel to a higher court. A judgment is a burden, no matter who wields it. The journey to the refinery was a race against time. The refinery's internal temperature was rising by the degree. Fendril and the other workers were huddled in the most heavily shielded corridors, their breath misting in the overheated air, which was growing thinner by the minute. Their monitors showed two sets of approaching icons, the small, swift signature of the Stellagraph and the vast, silent icon of the machine that was their last hope. The Xylos corporate fleet, a collection of brutish, heavily modified cargo haulers, and a few black market frigates formed a ragged line. Their commander, a corporate enforcer named Taggart, broadcast a system-wide warning. This is a legal and binding protest action. Any attempt to interfere will be met with force. The refinery's safety is its own administration's responsibility. We will not be moved. His voice was laced with the arrogant certainty of a man who believed his contract was more valuable than a human life. The deepest sins are signed on paper. The Stellagraph came to a halt just outside the Xylos firing line. The justiciar glided into position behind it, a mountain of black geometry that dwarfed the entire corporate fleet. It remained inert, its surface drinking the light waiting. The data packet is ready, Captain Joran reported. It's the single largest collection of legal and financial data ever compiled. We're talking centuries of case law stock market fluctuations, encrypted corporate memos we had to pull from the public archives. Everything. Transmit it, Kaylin ordered, and include a real-time biometric feed from the refinery workers. Their heart rates, their blood oxygen levels, the rising temperature. Let the court see the cost of every passing second. This was the core of his argument. Justice was not an abstract concept. It was measured in heartbeats. A law that ignores suffering is a law without a soul. The data streamed across the void, a silent, invisible river of information flowing into the heart of the ancient machine. For a long moment, nothing happened. The universe held its breath. Taggart, on the bridge of his lead ship, laughed. "What's this, trying to bore us to death with paperwork?" He ordered his weapons to lock onto the stellograph. "You have 10 seconds to withdraw before we open fire." Then the Justiciar acted. There was no flash of light, no blast of energy. There was only a low, pervasive hum that every ship in the system felt in its very frame. It was not a sound. It was a resonance, a vibration at the fundamental level of reality. The surface of the Justiciar did not turn into a mirror this time. Instead, thousands of lines of silvery light appeared, etching themselves across its black hull. They formed a vast, impossibly complex circuit diagram, a map of the entire economic and legal structure of the Praxis system. It remembers by ledgers. Across the system, on every financial exchange, every corporate terminal, every personal data pad, the accounts of the Xylos Corporation began to change. Their stock value plummeted not by trading, but by simple, stark declaration. A new entry appeared on every ledger, assets frozen pending adjudication. Every credit they possessed, every share, every tangible asset was locked. Their immense wealth, the source of all their power, vanished in an instant. The company on paper ceased to exist. Taggart stared at his console in disbelief as a red light blinked, indicating his own payment account had been zeroed out. "What is this? Some kind of system-wide hack?" It was not a hack. A hack could be traced, countered. This was an audit. A perfect, instantaneous, and absolute audit of every transaction the company had ever made. The silver lines on the Justiciar's hull pulsed, and a new data packet was broadcast to every receiver in the system. It was the complete, unredacted history of the Xylos Corporation's finances. It showed decades of fraud, bribery, and criminal conspiracy. It was a confession rendered in perfect, undeniable mathematics. A debt can be hidden, but it can never be erased. Simultaneously, the ships of the Xylos fleet lost power, not in an explosion, but in a gentle, controlled shutdown. The resonance hum had targeted the specific frequency of their drive cores, safely quenching the fusion reactions within them. Their lights remained on. Their life support continued to function. But they were adrift, their engines silenced, their weapons inert. They had been disarmed as neatly and efficiently as a surgeon removing a tumor. Taggart screamed at his crew to reboot the system to find a backup, but it was useless. They had not been damaged. They had been overruled. The law is a revocation of power. The blockade was gone. The path to the refinery was clear. On the bridge of the stellograph, the crew watched in stunned silence. They had witnessed a hostile takeover of reality itself. Kalen broadcast a message to the Praxian fleet. "Archon Reta, the blockade is lifted. The Xylos Corporation has been legally and financially dismantled. I advise you to send rescue and medical teams to the refinery immediately, and to send vessels to take the former employees of Xylos into custody." He did not wait for a reply. "Alara, get us over there. Let's help those people." The stellograph moved forward, a small ship in the sudden quiet aftermath of a battle that had been won without a single casualty. The Justiciar remained where it was, the glowing silver lines on its hull slowly fading back into black. The ledger had been balanced. The case was closed. Its work here was done. It had not just saved the workers. It had surgically removed a cancer from the body of Praxian society, and it had done so by enforcing the system's own laws, with a perfection the system itself could never achieve. It teaches by revealing the truth. The aftermath was a quiet storm of legal and social upheaval. The Xylos Corporation's executives were arrested, their mountain of evidence-proof crimes now laid bare for all to see. The Praxian legal system, faced with irrefutable proof of its own corruption, and inefficiency began the painful process of reform. Archon Retta, in a public address, formally rescinded all charges against Kalen Vance and his crew. She did not praise him, but she acknowledged the debt. The rescue of the refinery workers was a celebrated triumph, and the name Kalen Vance was spoken with a mixture of awe and fear across the entire sector. A formal tribunal was convened not to judge Kalen, but to understand the entity he now represented. He stood before the highest legal minds of Praxis, including a humbled Archon Retta, and made his case. He was no longer a desperate captain trying to survive. He was the advocate for a new kind of law. The justiciar is not a weapon, he argued, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. It is a mirror. It reflects our own laws back at us with perfect clarity. It does not create justice. It reveals where justice has failed. It does not punish. It balances. We cannot fear it because to fear it is to fear our own ideals. We must learn from it. We must partner with it. A mirror cannot lie. It can only be broken. He proposed a new framework, a set of protocols for how and when this ultimate legal power could be invoked. It would be a court of last resort, a final appeal when all other systems had failed, when the cost of inaction was measured in lives. It would never be used for conquest or personal gain. Its authority would be overseen by a new body, an independent council drawn from a dozen systems, with Kalen himself as its first director. He was proposing a leash for the god. He had unleashed a leash woven from the very laws it was built to enforce. The proposal was radical, terrifying, and necessary. After weeks of debate, it was ratified. The Vance Doctrine, as it came to be known, was signed into law. It was a new precedent, a new chapter in the history of the galaxy. The stewardship of the ancient machine was formalized. It had a place, a purpose, a defined jurisdiction. The weight of this new role settled on Kalen like a physical cloak. He was no longer a surveyor. He was the guardian of the ultimate legal principle. He and his crew were transferred to a new vessel, the Steward, a ship designed as a mobile embassy and legal archive with the stellograph honorably retired to a museum. Their mission was no longer to explore the stars, but to navigate the far more treacherous currents of injustice. Some debts can never be fully repaid. Kalen stood on the bridge of the Steward watching, as the Justiciar maintained its silent, watchful orbit around Praxis. Ilara was at his side, now his second in a command structure they were still inventing. Nomos was integrated into the new ship's systems, its logical mind a vital part of the Council's new machinery. The air on this bridge smelled new, a clean scent of manufactured promise and heavy responsibility. He could feel the cold light of the distant star on his face filtered through the viewport. He could hear the low, steady hum of a ship ready for a journey. On his command console, a new display had been installed. It was a direct feed from the Justiciar, a public record of its casework. 2 entries glowed there, written in a stark silver script. Case 001, the matter of the heirs of the void. Ruling symmetrical enforcement. Precedent, self-apparent aggression is its own indictment. A new line of text blinked into existence below it. Case 002, the matter of Xylos Vars. Series 7. Ruling restitution. Precedent. Corporate personhood does not supersede human life. He looked at that second entry, at the profound truth it held, a truth that had cost so much to prove. His work had just begun. There were 1,000 other systems, 1,000,000 other injustices, a ledger with countless empty pages waiting to be filled. He felt the immense burden of the future, but he did not feel it alone. The law is a promise. It is a declaration that we can be better than our instincts, that a shared truth is more powerful than a single sword. For too long, that promise had been bent and broken. Now the promise had a guardian. It was a silent patient and perfect judge, and it was waiting for its next case. The universe was full of courts, but now it had a conscience. The counting continues.